everyone, my name is Isa. I'm an artist and an author with my company Poppy and Grayco, and I am so excited to be here at Peggy's summer workshop retreat. So welcome, and I'm so glad that you're here today. We are going to be looking at these beautiful hollyhocks here and creating an ink and watercolor painting together. So we're going to paint together. Grab your watercolors, grab your fine liner pens, and we're gonna have so much fun. In 50 minutes or less, we will create something super beautiful. They'll be bright, they'll be loose, and we'll just have some fun together. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll see you in class. Hi everyone. Okay, so again, my name is Isa. I am an artist and an author with my company Poppy and Grayco. I wrote this book, Inking Florals, and this came out almost a year ago, last August, where I just take you through the steps of creating different flowers through using ink and watercolor. So we are using ink and watercolor today, and so it's pretty great that you get access to that. And we are going to be creating a hollyhock using this reference photo, which I got off Unsplash. If you haven't heard of it, it's a great website to find really beautiful photographs that you can use without infringing on any copyright. They, always try to credit the photographer if possible, if you're using it for an online project or anything like that, but they have really beautiful photographs there. So definitely check out unsplash.com. This is not an ad. It's just one of the websites I go to, and I really try to not infringe on copyright. So anyway, we are here to have fun, not to talk about copyright laws. Don't worry. Today is all about watercolor and ink, and we are going to do a really splashy, fun painting. So make sure you have a watercolor palette. We are going to be doing more of a pink colored hollyhock. So that's what I'm going to be using, but they do have different colored hollyhocks. They have redder ones, white ones. Feel free to Google it to see all the different colors that you could possibly make. I have like a really dark purple, almost like an eggplant color one growing in my yard right now. But today we're going to be doing pink just because that shows up on the page really well for guiding you guys through this. So you'll need watercolors, some watercolor paper, and then a fine liner pen as well. I'm just using a micron pen. This is size 05, just so it's a little bit bigger so that you guys can see it. But if you prefer a much finer tip, feel free to get a smaller brush or nib size on your ink. All right, so, and of course, last thing, you'll need your paintbrush as well. I'm, of course, just using the Pigeon Letters Studio Round Brush 10 for today's class because Peggy is amazing. But also, this is my go-to paintbrush. It's wonderful, and I love it. And Peggy's someone that we all want to support anyway, but also it's just good. So I'm going to walk you through some of the steps that I like to take when I am creating a painting. The first things I want to look at when I'm thinking about creating a flower or anything, you can take these tips and, sorry, shaking my camera here, take these tips and use them for anything that you want to create, which is looking at the general shapes that you see present in what you're taking from a three-dimensional space and putting onto a two-dimensional space. So we will notice, and I'll draw it on this page here, just so you can see the general shapes that I'm talking about, but that the hollyhock is generally a pretty round with frills. Sorry, you're gonna hear my kitten. It's a pretty round shape with a round center, and the stamen center part is almost like a cone shape. It might have areas that are missing, but generally the overall shape that we're looking for is pretty round, can be a little bit frilly. If we're looking at the buds of the plant, again, it's going to be pretty round, but with a little bit more of like a teardrop shape attached. So I like to just kind of get a view for what shapes are going into my flower that I'm going to be using. And we won't be looking at any leaves in this hollyhock, but we might want to add some leaves to it. So knowing what the leaves generally look like is probably a good idea too. So just pulling up another reference photo, actually from my book, we can see I did the shapes here as well. So the general shapes of the centers and then our leaves and what they look like in the reference photo here as well. So we can get a shape for the leaves if we feel like adding leaves in. They are generally a little bit wider along the base and then come up narrower at the top. So just to know generally how that looks and that they have these little kind of in and out aspects of it as well, so that when we are creating it, we can create it from any angle that we want to if we know what the general shape of something is. So keeping these in mind as we go forward, noting also, you know, that they are just one little bud at a time coming off of the stem, which is pretty straight and sturdy. And in this case, we will have one really large open flower, and then I might add another fully open or partially open one, even though it's not on here, just showing you that knowing the general shape of what we're creating, you can take a reference photo and not copy it exactly like you see it. So let's go ahead and lay out our actual painting. So in the reference photo, we see that it's coming off from the side. We don't see the bottom of this plant. We don't see the top of this plant. For the sake of creating this painting, I might change that a little bit just to give it a little bit more interest and pull our eyes in a little bit more. So I will probably end our flower probably right about here and just give it that top part of the flower. Hollyhocks just kind of come up and have a whole bunch of buds near the top with one kind of center bud up the highest, and that's how it ends. And I may add another additional flower in here just to, again, add a little bit more dimension to the image. And I might do like a partially open one here off of this bud and have a whole bunch of buds along there. And then maybe like a leaf down here or coming out of there. We'll have to see as we go along. So let's sketch this out here. So coming together, I am going to have it come up off the side and more towards the center. It'll be balanced as it comes, but I want it to look like it has some movement. So having it come just straight up in the center is totally an option, but I like to have some movement with my flowers. And the best way that I have found adding movement to flowers on the page is to have it coming in at a bit of an angle or having like a curve in it, just to show that flowers aren't just these straight, stagnant plants. All right, they are in fact organic. So with my pencil, I'm just going to come and kind of sketch out where I want this plant to go. I'm going to have one flower here. I'll have another one probably facing that way. There. Actually, I'm going to have it come up a little straighter, I think, in the center to not go over quite as far. A leaf, maybe a couple leaves, and then we'll just have buds coming up all along here. Okay, so I like to give myself a rough idea of where I want my flowers to be, and then I could do that also on this page, just kind of sketch out along with my shapes how it is I'm wanting it to look. But I do like to kind of sketch it out first which I know is a little bit harder to see in the video, but hopefully you guys can kind of get a feel for it. So let's go ahead and start actually drawing the flower. So I know that I'm going to have a flower here, so I'm going to erase most of this line so it doesn't interfere with my actual drawing of the flower. And I like to start from the center, so I will know where my center is, and this center kind of has almost a star-like pattern of a lighter color coming from the center where this center stamen bit is coming. So if I'm sketching in pencil first, I will just mark out where the center is and will add in the details, like the texture and everything of the center with my pen when I come in with that after. And then we are going to come out and start drawing just the exact shapes and lines that I see here. The Hollyhock is great because it has these little lines in here which will help you with your shading. And then if you have any concerns about how to draw the actual shape, I highly recommend printing something out if you can, or if you just have it on your computer, pause it, you can go, or if it's an actual photo, you can go and like actually draw, just get the muscle movement in there to get that muscle memory in your hand, and it makes it a lot easier to draw it on the page if it's a more complicated flower. So I'm just going to come in and start drawing in these petals. And I may not do it exactly every single line perfectly how it shows up here. I may decide to do it a little bit differently. And sometimes I will add in pencil some little references for me on where these lines are actually going for shading purposes, so I know when I come in with pen where to go. So I'm going along the general outline of this flower, and I am not doing every fold exactly the same because I know the general shape of the flower. I know that, you know, the petals all seem to be together as one, and I know that I can create the general round shape of the flower along with the little curvy edges just fine on my own without necessarily copying it exactly like it is. Like every little curve and everything. And that confidence just comes from knowing what the shapes are and what makes up the flower. If it were, say, a rose or something like that, like for example, if it were this flower, which I painted last year, if you know how many petals there are in a flower, then you can create any variety of the flower from all these different angles, just knowing generally what the flower petals look like. I know the shapes of them. I know how many there are per flower. I know what the general shape overall is and the individual shapes of everything that makes up the broader shape. And so that way you can create any angle. This one coming much more from the side, from almost directly straight on. Another side angle with a much more closed flower as opposed to the open one. So you can really see that you can create anything that you want that way. Okay, so now that we've created that one, I'm just going to come up and start creating the buds, keeping in mind that it kind of has the almost teardrop shape where it's wider on the bottom and thinner on the top. And I'm going to make this one similar to this, where it has these little openings where the pink is peeking through because it's about to open all the way. So I'll want to note that in here. Another one of these coming up and at me. The angle is a little more up, so our teardrop shape is going to be shifted off to the side a little so that we can see more angles of this teardrop. So we can see the top a little bit here. So instead of just, it's still a teardrop, but what we're seeing is also the back part of this little bud here. And it has a little leaf hanging off. And I'm gonna add a little bud over here as well. Just because I don't like the look of just being so stark over there. So I just want to add a little bit of something. And then we're going to come and do one that's open more to the side. So because I know the general shape, I can come and really kind of create my own flower, even though we don't have that exact one as a reference. You know, there's probably the stamen center part coming in here, and it's just a really curly flower. All right, and then coming up here, we're going to be having a bunch of these teardrop shapes coming off of the center stem. And I'll have one on this side that's partially open, I think. And then, of course, our flowers, nope, our petals, leaves, oh my gosh. I always start with the center vein when I'm doing a leaf. And there's a bunch of reasons why that is more helpful, and I go over all of them in a lot of detail in my Skillshare class, my latest Skillshare class, Bringing Florals to Life. So if you want to learn more about tricks on how to draw leaves or petals and how to look at a flower, that is a good class for you. For now, I'm just going to sketch out these leaves. All right, so there we go. We have our pencil part sketched out. Some smaller details might change a little bit as I come in with the ink fine liner pen, but that's generally taking what the shapes and everything that we have here and then adapting it a little bit to be our own, to add a little bit more dimension to it. So after we have sketched out the pencil part of this, we will come in with the ink fine liner pen and use the pencil lines as a guide. Now, I usually draw the pencil much lighter than this, but because I'm filming this, I've drawn it a lot darker, just so that I can make sure that you guys actually see it on camera. But then I will just come in and start going over the lines with my fine liner pen. Again, I'm using a 0.5 micron pen, which is a 0.45 millimeter line with the nib. And I will usually use a much smaller. I typically only use this size of a pen if I'm teaching a workshop or filming a class, just so that people can see better what I'm doing. But this is all about personal preference in terms of what you want, how thick you want your line to be. If you want it really fine, which I typically do for those really fine, much finer details, or if you want to be much bolder. So this time we are being a little more bold with our line. You can do whichever you prefer. And then with the fine liner pen, it does skip a bit, especially on watercolor paper, if you hold it at an angle, like more of a 45-degree angle, if you're using the micron pen, Peggy's pens don't do that because of the way that she designed the nib is much more round and spherical as opposed to the more boxy square nib of the Micron pen. I like that it skips when I'm doing more loose watercolors, so I'm okay with that. But if you're wanting to make sure you're getting a really straight line, keep in mind what pen you're using or what angle you're approaching the page from. And that's really just personal preference and what you want the final product to look like. Sometimes if it's not skipping enough, I intentionally will pull my pen up off the page and then leave a space so that I can get some intentional skips in there as well. And again, that is for me and my personal style and how I prefer my loose ink to look on the page. So it might look totally different for you, and that is a-okay. And then because it has some texture in this hollyhock center, I'm just doing tiny little C shapes, like literal C's, but I make them really small and really loose, and I just kind of build them on each other with a fine liner pen, and that just adds a little bit of texture to this little center part, and just adds a little bit more dimension in there. And again, just coming off the pencil sketch, just coming through. It may not match exactly, but you've given yourself quite a good guideline here with your pencil. And I know you can't see everything that I'm drawing when my hand is in the way, so I do apologize for that. But some angles I just have to go with in order to get that line. Okay, and I'm going to do all the outlines, and then I will come in afterwards and add some shading with the fine liner. That's just how I personally prefer to do it, so that I can just get a better view of what is happening on the page once I get rid of these pencil lines after we get in here. And you can, of course, pause this at any time if you're just needing some time to catch up. Well, I think you can pause it. You may not be going quite at the same pace as me, but I do want to make sure that we have a finished product by the end of this class. So again, just adding those little C's just to give it a little bit of texture and not make it feel quite as like a physical object, but more of an organic piece, organic flower. All right, and then coming up to the top, like I told you, we couldn't see it in the reference photo, but I did want to make sure that we actually had a top to this flower. And so looking at that other reference photo from my book, or just knowing how this kind of flower ends, I'm able to come in and just create kind of ending that I need to create. It sounded like I'm creating some sort of like phenomenal movie. The ending that she needed to create. Okay, I find myself highly entertaining, so apologize in advance. Oh my goodness. Okay. So this is kind of a pretty messy pen sketch, and I'm a-okay with that. I am going to come in and erase it. And it is going to probably shake the camera a little bit. Make sure your ink has dried all the way, and that will just depend on the pen you're using. So I can't tell you exactly how long to wait. Micron pens dry pretty quickly, but the bigger the nib, the more time it takes for the ink to dry because there is more ink being put out onto the page. So make sure your ink is completely dry before you try to come in and erase, otherwise you will be smudging your ink everywhere. All right. So there is our initial ink outline. And then I am going to come in and just add some very simple, light shading lines in with the petals, just to give that kind of feel for the movement and where it's going. Making sure that your shading lines go with the curve of the petal from the base of the petal, whether that's by the center or on the outside at the base, or and going out towards based on the outside curve of the leaf. I'm going out towards the top. And there, if you're practicing your shading, there's some great flowers that almost have the shade lines in their petals themselves. Like daisies are really great for that because they have those lines in there, and it's a really great way to practice shading and the direction that you need to take for different shading lines. Now I'm just doing a really kind of sparse and quick shading. I'm not doing anything in depth, just doing a light flick with my pen. I'm intentionally not doing it in depth because I want to keep this a looser feeling flower in terms of the ink, and because we're going to be doing a really loose watercolor. We're not going to be doing traditional watercolor added to this. It's going to be really loose, and I just want to make sure that we are maintaining that looseness just overall, because that's the style I've decided to do for this painting. You can certainly do much more detailed if that is what you're wanting, but that's not what I am going to be leading you through for this class today. Again, everything I'm doing is just going to be really loose, very sparse, and just keeping a really loose grip on my pen so that my hand, I'm not over controlling the painting. So at this point, we have essentially a coloring page. You essentially created a coloring page, and from here you can fill it in, quote unquote, however you want to. I'm going to be taking you through a much more loose watercolor feel. You can certainly do much more detailed. In my calendar this year, for June, I did Hollyhocks, and you can see I kept it pretty loose in here, and just keeping everything within the lines, but you can also do loose where you're kind of going outside of the lines, or whatever it is that you're wanting. So I will leave the center for last usually, but I'm going to come in with the paint color that I'm wanting for my painting, and just getting my paintbrush wet with water and grabbing some paint on my pen, on my paintbrush. Of course, with watercolor, you want to make sure that you have a lot of water, but not an excess of water. So I find people are either using too little water or way too much water, and it gets kind of soppy, or too little and you don't get that watercolor effect. And that part really just takes a lot of practice. I will come in and I am just going to be doing really loose, kind of within the lines of the petals of the flowers, avoiding as much as I can that little center area, which is much brighter. And my lines will go generally in the direction of the petals as well, so that while it is loose, we're also getting a general feel for the movement again of that flower. The way to add movement is to really add as many indicators or clues that there's movement in this flower as possible, so that you're taking this two-dimensional space and really making it feel a lot more three-dimensional and like there is depth and movement to it. And if you put down too much paint, you can just come in with a dry brush and just kind of dab and pull it up. And that way you have a lot more control of the paint. So now I have one layer of color down. I've done kind of a purpley pink here. Now I want to come in with more of a reddish pink. While my paint is still wet in some places, is totally fine. And I'm going to come in and just start adding some more lines on top of it. Again, to create this kind of looser watercolor vibe within the flower petals itself. And like I said before, you can certainly paint them all in precisely, but for me, I like this kind of looser style where I leave a lot of white within the flower itself, as well as adding these really loose layers of the flower in here. And then while that is drying, I don't want to add anything to the center while that's drying. I just want to let it dry a little bit. I will come in when it's a little bit wet because I don't mind if some of the more yellow that we're going to add to the center spreads out, because that's almost gives the indication of the reflection from the sun with the yellow shining onto the petals. But while it's drying a little bit, so I have some control over it, I am going to come with my green and just start filling in the buds and the stem and the leaves. Again, I'm not focused on filling in, sorry, my kitten. Again, I'm not focused on filling in every aspect of it per se, but instead just giving that sense of color and movement in the painting. And because watercolor is painted thinking from light to dark, I will try to start with a lighter color. I didn't as much with the flowers on this go. I went pretty bold, but I will try to come in with a lighter color, like this lighter green, and then any shadows or anything that I want to add on top of it goes on top, because we are thinking from light to dark in watercolor. So if there's a part that you want to keep white or really light, like the center, you don't want to touch that with paint because you can't make it lighter as you add more colors. Watercolor makes it darker as you add more colors, which is different from other paints, so I like to make note of that. And then I just start coming in with different colors of green to start adding some depth to these leaves and buds. And I am the kind of person who takes her palette and says, I want green, and I just kind of run it all along, or I have like 4 different greens over here and I mix them all together. To me, it feels a lot more organic. I know other artists, organic for me and my style, I know other artists do it differently. And there is, no right way for you. There are more traditional ways and less traditional ways, but there's no correct way for you. You have to figure that out in terms of what works for you. But I would say just using green just straight from the pan is probably done a lot less than mixing greens, especially in watercolor, because you just get so much more depth in terms of what comes up off the page, and it can be really, really beautiful. Okay, so the last color we need to add on here is this kind of yellowy center. So I just have a little bit of yellow on my brush, and I'm just going to come in and make sure that is added in there. And just for fun, we are going to get a really wet paintbrush, get some pink on, ooh, do we want pink? No, let's do like a yellowy green. Let's get yellow or like a bright green on our brush with a lot of white, a lot of water, excuse me. Saturated brush with water, and I picked some of this brighter green, and we're going to hold it about 4 inches above the page and just tap. And just get a bit of sprinkly, splattery fun, because why not? So there you go. We have painted our hollyhock together. And as you can see, you can change your reference photo. You can do a much denser field. You can make it even looser. It's really up to you. You can come in and do a much more precise kind of flower as well. If you prefer to do more precision in your flowers, you can certainly do that as well. And of course, we talked also about how knowing the overall shape of the flower and the overall shape of the individual petals allows you to create any kind of direction on that flower once you understand what that flower looks like. So thanks for joining us. I hope you learned something in this class today, and more importantly, I hope you had fun and that you want to keep going out into the world and creating.